In this lesson, you will consider the central poetic image and metaphor of the poem Digging. You will explore the language in detail, study how precise meaning is crafted through different literary techniques, and notice how Heaney shifts the focus with his use of tenses and other devices. I want you to reflect on the use of adverbials and temporal markers to structure time throughout the text, and to deconstruct and understand the nature of narrative recounting, to explore how memory of time and a place is crafted, and then finally to explore the creation of poetic voice and Heaney's viewpoint. It's been said that the moral and aesthetic education of the poet is at the heart of Heaney's Death of a Naturalist. Its original working title was The Advancements of Learning. When it was published in 1966, the first poem at the front of the collection was Digging. If you were choosing a metaphor such as digging, why choose that specific image? What do you want to explore? What do you want to compare to digging? So if you were going to do that, what things would be revealed through that process? How many things could you effectively compare to the process of unearthing or revealing or exposing? List a few now before we read on. Heaney's poem has a single central conceit or extended metaphor, which presents an analogy, comparing the poet's pen to the spade of his father and grandfather and claiming a similar experience or skill. He's unearthing the past, exposing history, exploring his roots, discovering what is buried, not just in his family's past and their experience, but in Ireland's. And by recording memories from childhood experiences, he explores the rural voice of the Irish landscape.
Digging. Between my finger and my thumb the squat pen rests. I'll dig with it.
In the poem, we see three generations: the grandfather, the father, and Heaney the son. James, Patrick, and Seamus Heaney grew up on the land. They knew the farming land, they knew the hardships of it. But the son, growing up, is educated, and he has a different way forward. He wins a scholarship, he writes poetry, and looking back, he sees how things have changed. In the poem, we have three generations: the time of the poet in 1966, 26 years before, a memory of his father digging, and an unspecified time in the past when the grandfather lived once. Look again at the poem and make a list, quite a simple list, of how you would describe life for the father and life for the son. And then add to that words which suggest that Heaney sees the experience as different for the father and the son. Heaney grew up in a farming community before finding fame and reputation years later as a poet. This journey and route started at Mossbourne in 1939, where he was born in a family cottage. He attended school at Anahorish Primary School, and when the family moved to Bellaghy in 1953, he applied for a scholarship and was successful in winning a place at St Colm's College, Derry. From here he went on to university at Queen's, Belfast, and became very successful, publishing poetry and becoming popular. At that time, winning awards with the Belfast group. He first started publishing poetry in 1962 while a student and collected 11 poems before going on to collate a number of poems with the encouragement of his friends in the Belfast group in 1966. This was highly recognised and critically acclaimed and led to Door in the Dark in 1969. Many of the poems we study come from these two collections. In the early 70s, he was a guest lecturer at the University of California, Berkeley, and after that experience, in 1972, he published Wintering Out. And because of the troubles and the violence in the north, he and his family moved to County Wicklow. Following that, he published North while he was teaching in Dublin, and the poems in North can explore ancient rivalries, ancient revenges and violence. Now let's look at the poem again and look a little more closely at the particular language devices. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests, snug as a gun. Under my window, a clean, rasping sound when the spade sinks into gravelly ground. My father digging. I look down till his straining rump among the flowerbeds bends low, comes up 20 years away, stooping in rhythm through potato drills where he was digging. If you look closely at the sections highlighted in green, the adverbials place this not only in the present, with between the moment of writing this poem, but also looking out through the window and the memory that is recalled from 20 years away. So the poem brings together the present, the moment of creation for the poem, and the memory 20 years ago away that it's based upon. If you look at the yellow highlighted pronouns, it's a very personal evocation of memory. It's my finger, my thumb, my window, and my father. It's all about Heaney and his memory. And then he looks down, I look down at him, at his straining rump, and he was digging. And so in recounting and reconstructing the memory, Heaney explores the significance of the memory. Look at the verb, the rasping sound. There, rasping appears a verb, but is actually an adjective, a clean rasping sound. It describes the sound as rasping, and it's that sibilance of rasping that we also see in the next line of the spade sinks into gravelly ground. You've got that sibilance, but you've also got the consonants of gr in gravelly ground. If you go back to the opening lines, between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests, snug as a gun. You've got those short consonants that punctuate the significance of the main clause, the squat pen rests. And the whole of that is enhanced by the assonance of the short vowel in thumb, snug, gun. The lines are tightly crafted, carefully controlled, and very, very comfortable. But interestingly, throughout this, you have the title digging. What that means is explored in the poem. And to start with, it's my father digging, and he was digging, a literal digging. And yet the poem, as we've seen, is a metaphor for exploring and uncovering this past, a metaphor for writing. And on to the next stanza. The coarse boot nestled on the lug, the shaft against the inside knee was levered firmly. He rooted out all tops, buried the bright edge deep, to scatter new potatoes that we picked, loving their cool hardness in our hands. By God, the old man could handle a spade, just like his old man. Look at the longer vowels here, the oo, e, oo. Those long vowels create a measured comfort, a skill in handling the material, not only what is being dug, but what is being written. The bright edge deep, to scatter new potatoes that we picked, loving their cool hardness. This is a calm, measured, pleasant memory. The boot is nestled on the lug. Against the knee was levered firmly. The adverb shows the skill, the crafting of digging. Notice the nestled. That sibilant is comforting and ends on that nice plosive D. Just like rooted, buried, levered, nestled, picked. It's all done with a measured control. And the whole thing is loving their cool hardness. That does not end. The progressive verb loving was true of the past, it's true of the present. Notice then the exclamation in yellow, by God. A traditional community would have been quite shocked by that, but by the 60s people are beginning to be more expressive, and by God is a clear exclamation, a fervent exclamation of how much this grandfather, the father, how they act in their community. The old man could handle a spade. Look at the epithet, the old man. Not my father now, it's the old man. He could handle a spade. Just like his old man. You've got the generations all handling a spade. And yet Heaney here is uncomfortable because he cannot do this. He does not do this. He doesn't follow in their footsteps. He has to find his own way in a new generation. My grandfather cut more turf in a day than any other man on Toner's bog. This almost childlike, playful one-upmanship shows the pride that Heaney has for his grandfather and his father looking at him now. They are established local people in the community. Once I carried him milk in a bottle corked sloppily with paper. Interestingly, Heaney sees himself as inadequate. He does things sloppily here. I carried him milk, though, as a sense of family pride. A memory once about what he did for his grandfather. I carried him milk, he straightened up to drink it, then fell to right away, nicking and slicing neatly, heaving sods over his shoulder, going down and down for the good turf. Look at the long vowels there, and turf and day and paper, away, straightened, slicing, neatly, heaving, shoulder, down, down, good turf. All of these slow measured vowels create the experience of digging. Digging has two levels here. Again, the memory, evoking the skill of the previous generations, but also the skill that Heaney now begins to craft as a poet. The skill of repeating these vowel sounds in the assonance. The digging here is not just the digging in the past, it is the digging of the poem. The cold smell of potato mould, the squelch and slap of soggy peat, the curt cuts of an edge, through living roots, awaken in my head. But I've no spade to follow men like them. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests. I'll dig with it. The key phrases here are what awakens in his head and the squat pen resting. The final stanzas bring the past and the present together, and we end at the poem, because the whole thing has been writing the poem, constructing the poem through the memory and what is awakened in Heaney's head. The cold smell of potato mould, the visceral olfactory evocation of that smell, and then the sound, the auditory squelch and slap of soggy peat, enhanced by those short vowels, and the curt cuts of an edge. The alliteration of that hard C cuts into this. The edge, the head, the men and them, the assonance of those short vowels, echoing through the memory. But all of this comes to the contrasting connective but, and there's a difference between the pronouns I and them, a difference between the generations that's broken here. But I've no spade to follow men like them. The final lines bring us to the heart of the poem, the point of the poem. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests. Squat is short, brief, secure, stable. And finally, Heaney ends with the first person pronoun and the intention, I'll dig with it. The metaphor is quite clear now. He will write poetry. He will dig with his pen. This is the first poem that Heaney wrote where he felt that he had captured a poem, crafted it. And here we see him years later in the field that has been dug, the turfs and sods turned over. But he sits there reflecting on that as the place that he's come from, the place of his origins, and how it's recorded for posterity for us today in his early work. As you read and study the poems, think about how you annotate each of the texts. On the left you can see some annotations from online, from a teacher's markings of sibilant sounds, past tense. Don't forget that we are reading the poems, but we have to look carefully at the language of the poems and how the sounds and structures shape and structure our point of view. So it might be a good idea to print off some rough copies for your initial annotations, and then when you annotate your actual anthology, put the measured, thoughtful, careful and controlled notes there. And look at the memories that Heaney uses in his poems. We mustn't forget that for many people, living off the land was harsh and a time of poverty. Heaney writes about that with a sense of tension because he has given up the family traditions and the culture to become a poet and to produce for us a vision of that past.